sadly, that's the truth. That quite often my staff call me Bazza, and they normally call me that, especially if we've got a major problem. Look, it is great to be here, and I'll just take a little bit of time while people are still filing in. Look, just as a silly anecdote, we're very proud of coming from a small regional community. And when I actually met a customer in China, probably a decade ago, as we were first sort of trying to get product in there and starting to develop some position, and he said to me, "You must be a very successful company. They've named a town after you." And I've gone, "That'll do? Yes." So anyway, look, ladies and gentlemen, it is perhaps important to tell the story of Bega, and we are very proud of our heritage and roots. And 1899 was indeed a long time ago, and the morning's been spent talking about change, and obviously it's been enormous. But I wouldn't question the fact that probably every decade or so over that entire 100 years, people have been talking about change and talking about how this is unusual. I was actually, I was at a conference the other day, and somebody was talking about the risk of ageing farmers. And I'd actually dug through the archives of Bega cheese for something a few months earlier. And in 1947, they were talking about the risk of ageing farmers. And so I kind of go, look, if we accept that change is inevitable, that generally helps us deal with most of it. That helps us deal with and let it wash over us, because we actually just have to accept that our world will continuously change. But some things will stay the same. Oh, now I need the clicker. So for me, where it begins for Bega cheese is here or somewhere like here. So my history is that I'm a dairy farmer's son. And to put it in sort of maybe politically incorrect terms, I was probably a fairly poor dairy farmer's son, as in financially poor. I always said, well, I didn't know I was poor till I went to high school, because nobody ever told me. I just thought that was how everybody lived. But as we got to high school, people started to talk about the fact that, we only had one pair of shoes, my mother was a lovely lady, still is. She bought me a jumper in year 7, or first form back then, that she thought would last me the 6 years of high school. I used to go cold most winters, because the sad thing over those 6 years is that I never grew. So for 7 years I had a dress for a jumper, but I was I guess concerned about the fact that farming, agriculture, dairy farming wasn't respected. That even in a small town like Bega, we were considered, maybe not destined for that many great things. There was a social strata in that town, as there would in many towns and certainly in cities, that said that agriculture was at the bottom of that social strata, and that indeed many farmers' sons or farmers themselves maybe didn't have the education, didn't have the intelligence, or didn't have the opportunity to move forward. So a lack of respect, to a certain extent, drove me in the early part of my life. So that picture is, in fact, the view from our dairy farm a couple of days ago. So I still get up and milk my cows on a Monday morning. It's the only morning I'm actually generally around, and my farm and the staff that work for me always go, I am the world's most unreliable employee, because I can't guarantee I'll be there, but if I'm there, I milk the cows. And I remember where the business of Bega cheese started, and indeed what sits at its core in terms of values. And every so often I look out at the beautiful Bega Valley and also remember why we market the product in the way we do. So I have been executive chairman of Bega Cheese for quite a while, and indeed I came to the job in the year 2000. Now that was an interesting time. And it was an interesting time because it was deregulation of the Australian dairy industry. And Bega cheese was located on the lower south coast of New South Wales. We had 1% of Australia's milk, a 30-year-old cheese factory, and most of our farmers produced about 70% of it, went to the regulated Sydney milk market at around 50 plus cents a litre. And deregulation was coming like a steam train. And I am sure Bega cheese was sitting on most corporate lists as a company guaranteed to disappear. It was sitting there for probably good reason, but perhaps for me as a young farmer coming into the job of chairman of Bega cheese, it was also pretty frightening because I was an ex-banker, I knew that the numbers didn't add up. And the farmers who were used to getting around 50 cents plus for 70% of the milk and then a little bit of extra from what Bega cheese might pay for the other 30%, I was suddenly going to have all their milk, and I was going to make an offer to them for that milk of 28 cents a litre. And many in this, I know how much farmers love having their price cut in half. And it doesn't matter why the messenger is the fault of the messenger. So when I got the job in 2000, I'd love to say I got it because I was the most skilled and the best applicant for the job, and I had this grand vision for the company. But the truth is, nobody else wanted it. And the truth is, because everybody said to me, it's a poison chalice. And the funny thing is, in the first weeks of doing it, I had a career outside agriculture, so I did what any leader does when you're given a challenge. I brought all my people together, and I said to them, what we've got to do is work out a competitive advantage. That's what we've got to do. We'll work out, what our competitive advantage is, and we'll focus on that. We went, right, so we've got 1% of Australia's milk. That is not a competitive advantage. We're in the middle of nowhere. Major freight costs to anywhere we want to get to. That's not a competitive advantage. We've got a brand, but it's only strong in one state, and we're under siege from the retailers in terms of just our ability to who were then at the time going national, and our ability to supply nationally was looking like a problem. And we kept going down the list, till we got to the point of going, every time we'd write something up, we'd rub it out. Every time we'd write something up, we'd rub it out. And I ended up going, don't worry, we need to stop. I finally worked out what our competitive advantage is. We don't have one. And nobody is going to expect us to succeed. I have a personal philosophy that goes back to that previous slide, that one of the things that I don't think leaders are very good at, and particularly Australians, and probably even Australian males, and probably if I was even worse, Australian males of my generation, we're not actually very good at sharing our dreams, and we're not actually very good at sharing our fears. And my perspective is that the secret strategy of Bega cheese is a willingness to share your dreams and share your fears. So what I did, literally not long after that little session where I didn't know what our strategy was going to be, is that I went and saw all the leaders of the various Australian dairy companies, and I told them what I would like to create, not in terms of the business itself, but what I'd like to create for my farmers, what I'd like to create as a business, what I'd like to create for my community, and what I had this grand dream of what I might be able to build. And then I told them absolutely everything that was wrong with my business and absolutely everything that was bothering me. And many of them would look at me and go, Barry, we're your competition. We're the people that are going to try and take you out. Why are you telling us what is worrying you? And I would always answer honestly. Because human beings have a problem. We have a natural instinct that is actually extraordinarily positive. And it's the reason why I use this analogy of telling people your dreams and sharing your fears. If you give somebody a problem, if you tell somebody something about what you might dream of or what you might fear, even somebody who doesn't like you very much, they can't help but think about it. They can't help but think about your problem. Not only can they not help but think about it, even my competitors, when I next met them, couldn't help but tell me the answer. They needed to share the fact that they had thought about it and that indeed they had some thoughts that might help us. So we began to create a model in 2000 that fundamentally saw us actually making money out of being a service provider to other dairy companies, taking costs out of the supply chain, trying to build scale in our particular model, in our particular area, getting strength in that area, being what I describe as being relevant and competitive, and I didn't mind what it was, we just needed to be relevant in one thing, and then we needed to be competitive in it, and then if we could develop those skills, we would duplicate that more and more and more. So the first 5 years of my leadership was fundamentally, and what surprises people, it was fundamentally me trying to take costs out of the supply chains for my competitors and convincing them to let me do parts of the job that they said was enough margin in it, they didn't like it, they didn't want to do it. We started to grow, and of course I was to them irrelevant because I was small. As I grew and as I've grown, those opportunities have become more difficult, but of course we've continued to change. And I won't go through that sort of change process that we keep reinventing, but I guess what those little boxes show you is that we're changing about every 5 or 6 years. We're changing and developing again and acquiring again and thinking about how the business will move forward every 5 or 6 years. So when we do something, we actually know that all that does is help us get ready for the next change. Now, I was really interested in the presentations this morning because I actually really believe that culture is what breeds success. The culture of the company that you lead, or indeed that you run, or the organisation or the farm, it is the culture that will actually guarantee that you can succeed in a variety of circumstances. So, these are the images that I guess I love about Bega cheese. The one in the far corner is the Tatura 200 bike ride. So when we bought Tatura, some would say that it was very much close to insolvency. Now, those that don't know Tatura, now Australia's largest infant formula producer, Australia's biggest exporter of cream cheese, wonderful infrastructure, wonderful business, wonderful people. When we bought it, it was on its knees. And the staff were sad because they'd been losing rather than winning, because they'd been struggling to know whether indeed this business would continue. So I decided, literally a week after we bought it, that we would have a bike ride, and we would call it the Tatura 200, and the staff would either help they would either ride, and the Tatura 200 stood for 200 kilometres in a day riding, and I decided they would either help us they would either ride the 200 kilometres, or they would help people get through the 200 kilometres, or they would help organise the event, but everybody would participate. And people went, is this the most important thing you can think to do with this business? It is in enormous trouble, and you want to have a bike ride, and you want to include the whole community. And I'm going, first thing we've got to learn is how to give. The first thing, this is going to give a lot back to the community. We're going to raise a lot of money, we're going to give it back to the community, we're going to actually, and I identified with the earlier presentation, we're going to actually ask the staff what organisations we should give the money to. Guess what you have to do if you need to ride 200 kilometres in a day? You have to train. And I said I'll go out and I'll train with them and I'll teach them to ride in pelotons. And slowly but surely, they started to go out themselves. And then different divisions started to ride themselves. And then it got a little bit competitive. What do you reckon you do if you're going out 3 times a week in the morning to ride and the only thing you've got in common is work? You talk about work. And you talk about the problems of work, and you talk about how to solve them, and you learn to rely on the person beside you, because a peloton is stronger if you ride in a group than if you ride alone. Suddenly there's people achieving, suddenly the business is starting to turn around. Suddenly people are achieving things. People are nominating charities to give money away. I'm talking to them about the fact that it's just not about what you do externally. It's about living by a mantra of, if you can help, you should. It's a simple mantra, but again, to make it personal, my wife expects that I will be found dead on the side of the road. She's absolutely certain that is how my life will end. And she's certain because I drive her crazy, because I never drive past a hitchhiker. I always pick them up. If I see a car broken down, even if I'm hellishly late for a meeting, I stop. I will always stop and help. Now, that might go, well, that's nice, but what does that really mean? Well, it's a state of mind and a logic that is extraordinarily important in business. So the funny thing is about pulling over at the side of the road and asking somebody if they're okay is that 90% of the time they go, yes. And they give you a smile and a wave and they say, thank you very much, that was so kind. And you go to work feeling good about yourself, and you don't mind being 5 minutes late for that meeting, and you go in there going, psychologically, the ability or the understanding that you give is extraordinarily important. So I've always believed in creating a giving culture, because what it causes is that at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, when somebody's walking past somebody's desk who's pounding away on some god-awful spreadsheet for sales into some faraway market, and they stop and say, is there anything I can do? The answer is generally no. I'm okay, I just need to get through this. But both parties feel better. Both parties feel like they're working for a team. The person that's going home generally comes back in the next morning and says, hey, how'd you go? And you create this culture of, and this is a term that's sometimes not politically correct, but you create a culture of winning. You create a culture of winning by teaching people the value of giving of themselves. So my perspective here is that this slide represents my entire supply chain. And I love the photo in the corner that people might or may not recognise, which is one of our farmers that fronts our Bega cheese ad, and his 3 sons and his grandsons and whatever else it might be. And I'm always really happy when people say to me, where did you find those actors? They're just so good. They're so much like farmers. And I go, yep, they are. They're our own. They're a lovely family. One of our staff there. We've now got, well, we will have when we complete our next transaction, 2,000 odd staff. So speaking of dreams, when I took over, we had 60, and we had a truckload of debt, 60 odd staff, and as I said, not sure where we're going to go. So 2,000 odd staff. We invest enormously in their training. We invest enormously in making sure that we build them into exceptionally skillful, exceptionally high quality people. So while we're trying to embed a culture on them, we're also trying to have them build skills, and we're absolutely very careful to make sure that everybody in our business understands the entire supply chain. That's why something like the TAT 200 is good, because our farmers help our staff get through. I've got to admit that one day when we were riding along in the peloton, and one of our farmers was standing beside there with with his boom spray and a hose at the ready to hose down the riders. I was a bit concerned about what had been previously in the boom spray, but that was okay. So I always say that people like me don't build great companies. It's the people that I help develop, that I help grow. It's people that build great companies. And it's certainly the story with Bega. It's grown now to be worth over, to have more than $1.2 billion worth of sales. It'll be even more. You can see that asset growth there that's enormous, and factories that we're extraordinarily proud of. But the dairy industry is a volatile industry. And we've been in the paper a fair bit of late. And we can talk about why, and we can talk about changes in global supply and demand, sanctions in Russia, all those things that challenge us every day as we try and find our way in the world. And there's been a lot said about the geopolitical effect of where we're standing today, and indeed the major megatrends that are driving more volatility, more change, more challenge for business. I find it really quite strange that we've got Donald Trump in the US, the country that espouses, although is not entirely wedded to free trade, building walls. And we've got Xi Jinping at Doha saying that China is the defender of free trade. We've got a lack of trust by the general community in what big organisations say. And it's interesting for me that it's very sad that government institutions such as the church, even large scientific institutions, have lost the trust of the public. It's also interesting to me that technology in its own way is helping bridge that gap. So while people are getting frustrated and voting to leave the EU, while the far right gets traction around the world, organisations like Uber are being successful. And I wonder if you dug down and thought about Uber and thought why they're being successful, what you might find. Why have they truly overtaken taxis? Well, part of it is that people stopped trusting the taxi would turn up when it said it would turn up. When you rang and they said, how far away are you? And they'd say 5 minutes, and 15 minutes later they hadn't arrived, people got frustrated. One of the main reasons why people like Uber is that they don't need to trust anymore, which is a little sad, but they don't need to trust anymore. They can see exactly where the vehicle is. So technology in its own way is changing the way we think, but can, in the right way, rebuild trust that has been lost. So we live in extraordinarily volatile times. We live in an era more likely to build trade barriers than encourage free trade. It's actually concerning. There's a saying that I quite like, which is that you know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And for me, regardless of the environment you operate in, you need to think about what you do to deal with a volatile world. A very good economist once said that when the global trade wars stop, the real wars start. So we've always got to be advocates for trade. We've always got to be advocates for keeping barriers down, for not being afraid of change, even in really difficult circumstances. So the dairy industry's been in the news a lot lately. The dairy industry, sadly, has managed to create a bit of its own crisis. And that was, of course, external factors did affect that, and it did, and sadly, it's affected the livelihoods of many, many farmers. Not all in the dairy industry made the decisions that were made by our friends at Murray Goulburn and Fonterra, but nevertheless, the crisis was Australia-wide. And it's not actually about being smart and saying we didn't make the mistakes that some of our competitors did, because, you know, we also had some impact from changes in the marketplace, from changes in regulations into China. Interestingly, that cartoon up there, my wife thought she should hide it from me. You know, thought I might be a bit upset. It was difficult enough to be losing lots of money in China on infant formula, and they started to make draw cartoons of it. But as I was very keen to say that as a young boy on that farm in Bega, I probably never thought I'd be in the national press, even in a nappy. So I was actually quite proud of the cartoon. So in a really difficult time, you have to keep accepting that the environment is something that you are in, is something to embrace and something to manage. So interestingly, as this crisis was going on, everybody was talking about the industry, whether it had a future, what it meant on farm, what companies would survive, and of course we were working away. We were working away, sticking to those original models of saying, where can we find an opportunity in the marketplace? It doesn't necessarily have to just be in dairy, but it does have to be somewhere where we'll be relevant, where we'll be competitive. So I like this saying even more now because of the logo down in the bottom corner. So we bought Vegemite. Nobody saw it coming. And the funny thing is about Vegemite, it's been owned in Australia for only 5 years. For the 90 of the 95 years of its existence, it's been owned by multinationals. The thing that I'm probably most proud of is that we were the Australian company that was able to go and convince a global multinational that it was better in our hands, and that indeed they should think about selling it to us. So we were delighted to surprise the market and expand in a different way, but in a way that makes Bega Cheese go from being an iconic dairy company to being an iconic Australian food company. That little town of 5,000 people, the home of Bega Cheese, now owns 2 of Australia's favourite brands in cheese and Bega Cheese and Vegemite. It actually shows you what dreams can deliver, and it shows you what sharing fears can do for you. You do not think for 1 minute that I didn't share those same concerns with my friends in Chicago as I tried to talk them into the fact that we were the right buyer for Vegemite. I'm not going to bother going into the details too much, but for that guy that had a jumper that didn't fit for 6 years, paying $460 million for an iconic Australian brand was an important moment, I guess, in the history of the company. It was also an important moment for those 2,000 odd staff that can feel really proud of what we do as a business. We don't lose that culture of giving. We don't lose the fact that we need to keep developing people and growing. The funny thing is, it is a strong alignment. So where people didn't see it coming, and this is what when you're a listed company, you like to surprise the market. People didn't see it coming, but it was a strong cultural fit around brands, and it was a wonderful fit around the culture of both organisations and the way in which the people we met in that business were very much like the people that we have in our own. And we can't help having a farmer origin. So as much as we're of course extremely proud of the business we own, and we're sort of chuffed that we're now one of the biggest landholders in a 2-kilometre radius of the Melbourne CBD with this wonderful facility that we've now got included in it. Everybody was speculating at the time that, well, the first thing they'll do is sell that facility. And I had to end up saying to a number of market analysts that, look, at heart, I'm a farmer. Farmers don't sell land, they keep it. They keep it because they believe that it'll get worth more, and it will. We don't forget that that we need partners to be successful. So at the same time as we bought Vegemite, we did a really big deal, a $200 million deal, with one of the world's largest infant formula players. So in some cases, we'll take the lead. In other places, we'll take a partner and we'll follow, and we'll allow to play to their strengths. So you don't have to do everything yourself. What you have to do is make sure that you can find a niche where you work with others. Sometimes you can be the leader of others. Sometimes you work in that team. So I don't really want to dwell on short-term measures, but I was a little bit chuffed that in one of the most volatile years in dairy, in one of the most challenging moments that the industry has had since deregulation, Bega Cheese was actually the best performing stock on the ASX in January, which actually showed that investors will support long-term vision, long-term strategy, something that is well thought through. So I always say that it's important for Australia and Australian agriculture to be investment ready. I think what this demonstrated is that the market actually decided we were well and truly investment ready, and they pushed our share price up, which, just by the way, along with all the institutional shareholders and all the mum and dad shareholders, about 40% of our shareholders are actually dairy farmers. So they all went with that ride as well, which is always very pleasing for me. Oh. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a great believer in training. I'm a great believer in research and development. I'm a great believer in all the things that make a very successful company that are well documented. But I'm also a great believer in dreaming and sharing those dreams. It's a fantastic, I guess, demonstration of what sharing those dreams can do in terms of something corporate which people wouldn't necessarily think about. I say to my staff that these are the sorts of words that, I like them to deal with. In there, you'll see manners is extraordinarily important, but at the centre of it is that, you want to have people share their dreams. So you saw sunrise, that sunset. We do need a new shed, but we'll get to that. Okay, thank you, everybody.